Hey everyone, this is Kamran and today we'll be talking about the queue data structure. In our last video we talked about the stack. Similar to the stacks, queue is a linear collection of items where items are inserted and removed in a specific order. If you recall the stacks from the last video, in stacks we used to have the items which were stored in a stacked format and they were taken out according to the LIFO principle or last in, first out, which means that the item on top of the stack will be the first to be taken out. So in this case, we will first get the baby doe, then we will get the Jenny doe, then Jane doe, and finally we will get the John doe. In queues, we have the opposite. The items get inserted from one end of the queue. So for example, here I am adding 6 elements to the queue and they get taken out on the other end of the queue. So we will first get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So as you can see that the item which was inserted first will be the first to be taken out. So we can say that the queue follows the FIFO principle or first in, first out. Again, the item which was inserted first into the queue will be the first to be taken out. Alright, so now that we know what the queues are and how they work, let's look at the operations you can perform on a queue. So here I am creating an empty queue by creating an object of the queue class, and this will give us an empty queue. And then we can check if the queue is empty using the queue.isEmpty method, which will give us true because the queue is empty. Then we can add items to the queue using the enqueue method. So I will do queue.enqueue5 and this will push 5 into the queue. I can add more items also. So let's say that I push 12 and 30 using the same enqueue method. Next we have the peek method, which gives us the item which is in front of the queue. So right now we have the 5 in front of a queue, so it will give us 5. To remove or access an item from the front of a queue, we use the dequeue method. So if I run queue.dequeue, so this will give us back 5. It will remove 5 from the queue and move the head to the next item in queue. If we run dequeue again, this will give us 12 and queue will now only have 30. And also I can check the number of items in the queue. So I can use queue.size, which will return 1 because there is only one item in the queue. Alright, so now that we know what the queues are, how they work, and what are the different operations you can perform on a queue, let's look at a sample implementation of the queues in JavaScript. Here I have a class called queue, which has the implementation of the queues in JavaScript. Inside the constructor, we are creating an empty array of items, which is going to hold the item of the queue. We can also implement the queue using linked list, but for now, let's look at the array implementation. So the first method we have is called enqueue, which is accepting an item, and it is simply adding the item to the end of the array. And then we have the dequeue method, which removes the first item of the queue and returns that also. And for that, we're using the shift method, which is built into the JavaScript arrays. Then we have the size method, which is simply returning the number of items that we have in the queue. And finally, we have the peek method, which is returning the first method of the queue. And then we have some code to test the implementation of the queue. So here we are creating a new object from the queue class. So this will give us the empty queue. And then we are adding 5 to the queue using the enqueue method, which will give us the queue with one item. And then we are adding 10, which will get added after 5. And then we are adding 13, which will get added after 10. And then we have peek, which gives us the first item of the queue. So in this case, we have 5 as the first item. So this will give us 5. So dequeue removes the first item from the queue. So in this case, we will get 5 and then the remaining queue will be 10 and 13. If we call peek now, so the first item in the queue is now 10. So this will give us 10 now. And now if we check the size of the queue, we'll have 2 because there are 2 items in the queue. And that is all for this one. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I will see you in the next one.